Hey, Brass Facts here. Today we're going to be looking at the Palmetto State Armory Dagger. I've had this guy for about 5 months in the configuration you see here. And you'll notice I have actually a optic on it. Almost none of the time in this review was spent with the default iron sights, so I'm not even going to mention them because, well, I can shoot irons, I just don't want to. And since I did carry this throughout the testing cycle, it was a requirement for me to have a red dot sight, so it is what it is. On that note, before getting started, just to kind of prime you guys on some stuff, I had the TLR 1 HL for roughly 2,300 rounds, obviously for the full round count on this handgun. I had this Holosun for even more, or even slightly less, 2,000 rounds. No issues with the Holosun. This guy did die at 300 rounds when it was on the TP9, I believe. The Ducat Defense, which is how I got this sight on here without milling the slide, is roughly, God, who knows, 15,000 rounds at this point. I did the original review on the original gun, and around like 12,000 if I recall. So yeah, we'll say 15,000 rounds. I don't actually track it. So still kicking, still doing great. Granted, it's a piece of metal, but some people manage to fuck that up. So this pistol itself has had just shy of 1,700 rounds. I'm saying all of this as a data point. Round counts are relatively rarely indicative of anything at all beyond a certain point, but it's good to know, right, as just a sample size, right? If you're looking through a lot of other reviews, it's good information. A certain number of people believe Glocks are overpriced because it's got that Louis Vuitton effect. The name on the side jacks the price up through the roof. So Glocks are generally one of the more expensive striker fire handguns, though not meaningfully so. And then other people say there is no compromise, right? Glock is Glock, and they set the standard, and to a degree, they still are the standard when it comes to striker fire handguns. There's no substitute, right? So this is an interesting case study, if you will. If a company has the blueprint, essentially, for making a Glock, can they make a Glock that is just as good as a Glock at a cheaper price point without having, the Glock markup name? Well, let's find out. The PSA Dagger, as I mentioned bluntly, is a Glock 3 clone, or a Glock Gen 3 clone. The patent ran out, and PSA decided to try their hand at it. Thus, the PSA Dagger. I don't really get the name, to be honest. This means you have a lot of cross-compatibility with Glock parts. You can even play musical chairs if you'd like, and swap a Gen 3 Glock slide with the lower and a PSA Dagger onto the Gen 3 lower. Why? I don't know. Science. This one comes Cerakoted from the factory. It's hard to tell because it's worn a little bit, but this is actually gray. There is the default option, $300 or so, is black, and you can get a couple other colors. The gun comes with a singular Glock PMag, got to keep that price point down, and the usual junk like locks and all that stuff, and a brochure to tell you how to not shoot yourself, the usual stuff, in a cardboard box. Who cares? It's got a rail up front for your light, standard stuff, and the takedown is identical to the Glock, that 3-finger affair where you need more than one hand to take it apart. Yeah, that's really a bit. If you haven't figured it out yet, this do be a Glock. It's virtually identical in a lot of functions. I'd take it apart, and you'd see on the internals, once again, because this is using the Glock patent, or the Glock blueprints, I guess if you'd want to call it, the internals are virtually identical. YouTube hates gun takedowns, so we're not going to be doing that here today, but I guess take my word for it, or Google it. Into the observations, I skipped a lot of the features of this thing, because in my experience, the big standout points of the the PSA Dagger is not really the features because it's a Glock, but it's what PSA has done different than a Glock. So we'll get into that shortly. Right out of the gate, the trigger. This thing fucking sucks. This thing is bad from the factory. This might be the first 4-stage trigger I've ever messed with. When you pull the trigger, you will hit a wall, and then you'll hit another wall, and then you'll hit another wall, and you'll go through multiple levels of grit as you're breaking through the wall. That being said, good news, When you get through about 400 rounds, you do dry fire. That quickly changes, and you get something that is not as good as, but analogous to a Glock trigger. Ghosting the trigger with you real quick. You can see. Here, let's zoom that bitch in. You have the first stage. This is a bit gritty. You can kind of feel friction. Then you hit your wall. And if you go really slowly, you can see some of that grittiness I mentioned before. But it's very hard to tell. And for all intents and purposes, this is almost as good as a Glock trigger. Running it through with a Glock trigger, you'll notice this is a lot smoother up front. And the wall is just as defined, and it's just a little better. It's just a more refined trigger with the Glock Gen 3, Gen 4, and even Gen 5. The only real difference is that the drop safety, this little doohickey up front, has been swapped out for a hinge style. Functionally, they do the exact same thing. The grip texture, actually one of the better things of the Glock Dagger, and an improvement in some ways and not in others versus a factory Gen 3 Glock. Texture-wise, this trigger or this grip is excellent. It's very similar to the MMP 2.0, which is funny considering the trigger, in that it's incredibly grippy for your hand, and it does aid in your ability to, grip the handgun without being so grippy that, say, like with this stipple texture right here, it begins to chew on your clothes, on your skin, whatever, when you conceal carry it, because I imagine most people will be conceal carrying something like this. So it really strikes that balance, and this is one of the better grip textures I've seen on a striker polymer handgun. And you can see my skin has kind of been eaten away over time. Not a big deal. It's also got some slight finger cutouts over here. You notice there's a groove where your knuckle wants to hang out. If you've done a lot of handgun shooting with Glocks, specifically Glocks, you'll notice this concept called Glock Finger or Glock Knuckle. If you notice right here, I have a large spot on my, the knuckle below my trigger finger on my left side because I'm a lefty. Glocks basically have a rectangle over here and hard edges, and this stuff cuts into your hand and it creates calluses. This is why a lot of people that do a lot of shooting will mill this area out so it's much less, bad. This comes from the factory with a slight cutout. Is it as good as a, stippled cutout that's been smoothed out? No, but it's significantly better than the Gen 3 default. So good job, PSA. I appreciate it. There is one downside in that the bore axis is higher due to the dovetail not cutting in nearly as much as on a Glock. This is one of those things that's really hard to tell unless you have it in person because visually they look quite similar. But absolutely, the Glock PSA, the PSA Dagger sits higher in the hand ever so slightly. It's not, Starlink orbital P320 heights, but it's noticeably higher than a default Glock. Maybe like an MMP. I don't know. We keep mentioning the MMP, so we might as well keep the thing going. You have these excellent cutouts down here, so when you have a mag in, it kind of protrudes. And these cutouts serve really well to pinch the fuck out of yourself when you slam home a mag when you have a bad grip. In all seriousness, these are meant to aid in extraction of the mags. I don't think this is a thing. I've never seen a malfunction so bad you need a cutout like this to help extract the mag, so I don't really know why these are here. The big standout difference that I noticed on the internals, as I mentioned earlier, can't show it because YouTube and stuff, is the guide rod. This one has a metal guide rod, and it's actually very similar to aftermarket guide rods. The Gen 3 Glock has a plastic guide rod. Does this matter? No. It's nice to see, but yeah, just something worth mentioning. Externally, you can see right here, the Glock is quite smooth. Very smooth, actually. And the Dagger comes with slide serrations that are both more aggressive in the rear area, and they exist on the front slide serrations, right? Front slide serrations weren't really a thing back when Glock Gen 3s were around. Nice to have them here. Good job, PSA. The Dagger is somewhat temperamental when taking it apart. Not that it's hard or anything, but there's a little bit more schlop with the slide, and it'll come partially off of the slide, such that if you do it really fast, you might hit the second rail. If you've taken apart a handgun, you kind of know what I'm talking about. You kind of have to hold it down and make sure you're guiding it along the rails, otherwise it'll catch. Finally, the roll pin over here. A lot of people, myself included, have had issues with this thing walking out. Hop has done, on his review, his walked out and tried to kill itself like every 200 rounds or so. For me, it's tried to walk out twice. That is, it walked out, I smashed it in, walked out, I smashed it in over the first 500 or so rounds, at which point it decided that this wasn't worth the effort, and it's been in here ever since. I have never seen it try the walkout since. So your mileage may vary with this roll pin. In terms of shootability, the recoil impulse is basically the same as a, Gen 3 Glock. I'll say it does recoil ever so slightly differently, and I think that has to do with how the bore axis sits. Glocks just kind of return more flat, while this wants to flop just a little bit more. Accuracy is slightly worse than a Gen 3 in terms of performance compared to a Gen 3. I score about 2 to 3 points less on average on a 25-yard B8, and my overall accuracy is just a hair worse. I think that does have to do somewhat with the trigger being something I'm not quite used to, right? It's subtly different compared to the Gen 3 Glock or Gen 4 Glock, which is what I shoot. So a lot of that can be attributed to that, but there is slight accuracy degradation with this gun over a Glock, specifically Gen 5 or even Gen 4 Glocks or even aftermarket barrels, all of which I've compared to this. Now getting on to some less nice things. Because the PSA Dagger is ever so slightly dimensionally different right here compared to a standard Glock, this doesn't work with Glock holsters. Some holsters work due to them having quite loose tolerances at this point specifically, but overall it seems Glock holsters do not work with the PSA Dagger as sort of a rule. I have a video up here where I get into detail of the thing. Some people might argue it's its own gun, so it gets its own holster, but for me personally, if you use the Glock patent or even blueprints per se, shouldn't it use a Glock holster? I don't know, I feel like that's a huge miss here. Some other issues I've noticed in terms of dimensional things is maybe it's due to the Cerakote, I'm not sure, but the dovetail over here is noticeably tighter than a Glock dovetail. I've swapped out a lot of rear sights, and this rear sight sucked to get in. I tried both directions to be sure. Maybe they swapped the taper, because Glock sights are tapered. No, I could not get this thing in easily. So, just be warned. Maybe it's just mine. Maybe it's just the Cerakoted models. But I had noticeable issues getting the sight out and then this sight base back in. So be ready. You're gonna need a vise. You're gonna need a mallet, and you're probably gonna swear a lot. On to reliability. That's a big question, right? How did the Glock Dagger do in terms of reliability compared to a Glock? It is a Glock after all, so it should be somewhat similar. No. Let's start out with hollow points to get that out of the way. I've shot 50 rounds of hollow points. Sadly, that's it. But this channel is already very much in the red in terms of profitability, right? I'm spending a lot of my personal money for reviews that I, don't really see a return on. So maybe you should hit up subscribe star, yeah. But I'm not willing to commit, 500 rounds of hollow point for a single review. It's just not in the cards for me. So sorry about that. But those 50 rounds of hollow points worked well. And this gun actually worked quite well for about 800 to 1,000 rounds. But in the last 800 rounds or so, the malfunctions really began to pick up. The majority of these were Tula and steel caused malfunctions. But a number of these, 800 rounds of brass throughout the entire review, were caused with brass full-powered ammo. Specifically Norma 115 and 124 grains, I believe. Near the end, on the last couple shoot days, specifically colder days, I was looking at something like 1 in 50 malfunctions, so 1 per box essentially, and that really equates to about 2 to 3 malfunctions per range trip, or about 1 malfunction per 2 mags. That is not insignificant. This happened both with steel and brass, though significantly less with brass. With brass, I experienced 3 malfunctions over the 800 rounds of brass I used, one of which was actually utterly catastrophic to the point where it broke the tool as we tried to remove or extract the casing, and we had to use a ramrod to get the casing out of the gun with a mallet. So that gun was down hard. All of the steel-related malfunctions were, I would call them magazine-related malfunctions, in the sense that I never had extraction-related malfunctions, aside from that one I just mentioned. Most of these were, I had the malfunction, and you look, and it's a live round that is doing something weird, like stovepiping, not a spent round. So this generally indicates mag-related issues or feeding-related issues, not extraction-related issues. Right? Glock 19s will fail in a similar condition I put them in. Steel ammo plus Glock PMags plus cold plus not cleaning the gun or the mags plus dust ingress, right? I drop the mags on reloads into the dirt, dust gets in, generally not dirt, but dust gets in, and you have a significantly higher coefficient of friction. Stuff just does not move very well. And as I mentioned, these were mostly mag related, probably due to issues of the bullets moving up the magazine. But that doesn't fully exclude the PSA Dagger, because this Glock and the other Glock I own did not experience nearly as many failures as the PSA Dagger, and quite frankly, this is about as scientific as it gets for a gun review. I'm using 2 guns at the same time, same weather conditions, same magazines, same ammo, same everything. And this one malfunctioned significantly more than this Glock. So, while the magazines were partially at fault, and I do expect some degree of malfunctions, this was above and beyond compared to this gun. Finally, something to consider. The Glock, I keep saying it, not the Glock Dagger, the PSA Dagger, is often listed as a $300 Glock. Or in this case, the Cerakoted model, a $350 Glock. But this is a bit misleading. Because Primary Arms only sells this through their website, you have to go through an extra step or two to get this in your hands. However, when you buy this, you need to pay 8% tax locked in, right? Because you're buying it through PSA. You need to pay shipping. This is mandatory, obviously. And then you need to go get this from your FFL and do a transfer. That generally costs anywhere from $10 to $50. All said and done, let's say you get $10, $20 FFL transfer fee, you're going to be looking at closer to $350 out the door or $400 out the door. Or if you're me and you paid $50 for a transfer fee, $450 out the door. So just understand, this isn't as cheap as the sayings go. There is tax and all that junk, so just be advised. All right, on to the opinion section. The big question is this worth it? Is this a good pistol? It really depends. From a shootability, functionality standpoint of the shooter experience, I think this is a good pistol. It recoils like a Glock. It handles like a Glock. Going through this review process, I never once thought, man, I can't wait to go back to shooting my Glocks. It was similar enough that I didn't care. And if you view this handgun in isolation, right, you do the Aaron Cowan thing where you don't compare it to the competitions, right? That's a big thing he likes to harp on. It's actually not a terrible handgun. It's got good ergos. It's got a good trigger. Well, good if you're okay with Glock triggers. The mags are really cheap, so you can get a lot of mags. You have a good aftermarket. And while this isn't Glock holster compatible, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's not a good thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. If we have reviewed every single pistol, every new pistol that is, on the basis of holster compatibility, we would never review a new pistol favorably because, well, if it's new, there's no holsters for it. If the gun is good, holster compatibility will follow. Especially since I believe the MOS version of this just shipped out, so that's a really easy way to get into an optic-mounted handgun. So this gun, in my opinion, appeals for those, and there's a lot of people like this that change their handgun, once every 8 months. And it works out fine. You're having the Glock shooting experience for, I don't know, $200 less, $100 less. But here's the thing. Glocks do exist, and so do other guns. I don't buy a new handgun every couple, or every year or so. I stick to one gun because to me, a handgun like this isn't exciting or sexy. I just shoot it because I want to stay good at handguns, and that's where it stops for me. I don't really enjoy handguns that much, right? This is a tool for me. For a serious shooter, this is not a good choice. This gun brings nothing new to the table, outside of being a cheap Glock. That is its only party trick. And for those people that regularly shoot and that train a fair bit because they want to be good with their handgun, the cost of a handgun is trivial once you get to your third or fourth box of, ammunition, especially during COVID pricing. And then you add in the fact that we're not even comparing a full pistol, we're comparing the cost difference between these two, which is actually not that much. Price difference really becomes irrelevant quickly. So the price gain isn't really that big of a deal, but the downsides of this handgun stick with you for the entire ownership of owning this handgun. It doesn't take Glock holsters, which is kind of a pain in the ass if you already own Glocks. And if you're getting into handguns, you're going to have to do a lot more searching, and you're actually going to have to know that this doesn't take Glock holsters. And while I said earlier the malfunctions are understandable, in the context of being able to buy other handguns, that is not acceptable, right? I can have this, or for just a little bit more, I can have this. The Glock has significantly less malfunctions. I used both OEM, PMags, so on and so forth, and the Glock vastly outperformed the PSA Dagger. This is not, in my opinion, a good choice for serious duty, CCW, whatever you want to call it, usage. There are other options on the market that are functionally similar or identical that don't have the issues this guy has. You can obviously just, buy a Glock for $100 to $200 more. But even something like an M&P 2.0 were coming in at something like $450 before the pandemic. And a Gen 1 M&P was coming in at below $400, which is basically the same price as this thing. And that is a drastically better pistol in terms of reliability and performance. Admittedly, it has a worse trigger and a worse grip texture, but, that's neither here nor there. The point is, the Gen 1 Dagger really only makes sense if you're looking to shoot for fun. The value proposition of, hey, I'm saving some money, only makes sense if the Dagger, in terms of reliability, was roughly the same with the industry standards. We can then overlook some of the weird, idiosyncrasies the Dagger brings to the table. But it's not on that same plane, so that conversation isn't worth having. This is not a serious use firearm. If a Gen 2 came out and reliability was sorted and everything else was the same, yeah, this makes sense. But it's not. To me, this is a fun handgun that gets you Glock stuff without paying Glock money. Now, there's the conversation of some people just can't afford it. And there is a very, very small subsection of people that is true. But as someone that has just graduated, I've been in college for, the last forever, it feels like, money is tight for me. And even I, having just graduated, being between jobs, would still not recommend buying this firearm. I'm broke as fuck right now. And it's not worth it. If anything, it's more important for someone that can't buy a lot of handguns to do it right the first time. All right. I think we get the point. I'm beginning to reach into lecturing territory and condescending territory, so I'm sorry. I'll stop. We'll end this review here. You get the point. This was a fairly long review, so if you want to continue seeing reviews like this, support the channel long term, right? Keep this a viable project, perhaps consider hitting up Subscribestar. If not, no worries. I get it, man. Leaving a comment, liking, all that bullshit YouTubers tell you to do. Yeah, it's kind of nice. But it is what it is. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found my argumentation fair. Regardless, thanks for watching. We'll see you around.